Hi, I'm Del with Healing Frequencies Music, and this video is more about part of my journey, which I've written in a couple of books. And I just like to share some of that information with you, specifically because we're in a time and season where there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And we have things coming at us all the time, and we need to learn how to deal with the junk around us that can cause the interestingness, for lack of a better term, to affect us. So how do we keep from letting all the junk settle into our system so that it does not good things to us? All right, so with that, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, making sure I have the correct one up that I am looking for. And we're going to do a slideshow presentation in PowerPoint, because I find, I'm a teacher. So as a teacher, I try to find a variety of ways to present the information so that everybody understands what's going on, and then you can take away what you want from the presentation. So here we go. I got to share the screen. Whoops. Okay. Now I'm going to start the slideshow from the beginning. Is it going to let me? There it goes. I always like pulling the screen back. I'm a musician. I spent many years in an orchestral pit and love the screen when it goes back. I'm going to move myself a little bit further up because there are some things. This presentation is about transforming our mindsets. How do we do that? And I'm going to walk through a little bit of my process of how I did this. And it all began with the book, But Words Will Never Hurt Me. The story begins in the summer of 1994 in Moscow, Idaho, which is where I have met and married Todd. You'll notice in this picture, this is an actual picture of me from when I was a house director at a sorority with my cat. Look carefully at the words that are on that picture. It'll give you an idea what was going on. By 1999, the marriage was in shambles. It was leaving me sick, and I was desperate for answers. I am not a person who does sick. So for me, in this short amount of time, to go from completely vibrant from a completely vibrant person to I had zero energy, couldn't function, something was up. The story ends in the summer of 2000 when we divorce, and I've taken a job as a house director on the U of I campus. When, where, and how does healing begin? That was what the journey that I started and struggled for a while. And I'll explain to you how and why that happened. But Words Will Never Hurt Me is available on Amazon. It is the first of the Healing from Abuse series that has a supporting workbook. If you know anybody who's been through abuse, this book will help identify what those abuses are. Because I was so numb when I wrote this book. I had journal entries, and all I did was go to my journals and copy verbatim with some edits what was spoken between me and Todd. And because I would literally sit there and write in my journal when we were talking, did you say this? Yes. Did you say this? Yes. The next day I'd go back, oh, well, you wrote it down wrong. That's called crazy making. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about that, but other than if you have an abusive boss, if you have an abusive spouse, abusive coworker, abusive children, especially adult children, there's a lot of ways that you can be dealing with abuse. So we'll leave that there as we go on to the next thing. This then morphs into how our healing begins. And I found out that real true healing doesn't begin until we leave in an abusive situation. So let that sink in for a minute. Now, if you were in a situation at work, for example, where you can go home at night, that is different than what my situation was, which you'll understand in a second. I went from an abusive husband to an abusive boss. And I had the opportunity to leave that situation, but fear, keep track of that word, fear kept me from making that decision. It was, where do I go from here? I don't have a house. I don't have a place to live. I don't have a job. All of those things kept me from leaving the abusive situation. Some healing took place during this 10-year period. What held the process back? And a spiritual awakening is what ultimately led to a continuation of the healing process. I hadn't ever thought about that as being necessary, but you'll understand more about how that works as we continue. The next book, Transforming Mindsets, basically takes off or begins at the end of this 10-year period, which is in the 2009, Christmas of 2009. And I had to literally discover the need to completely change my way of thinking. Well, we don't necessarily realize that. So in this presentation, I'll introduce you to the process. The other thing that I will say about the first point up there, I went from an abusive husband to an abusive boss. I was living in a sorority house with 72 women. I could never leave or get away from the situation. That is the difference between living with an abuser and being able to, you're working with them and then you turn around, you go home. That makes a slight difference. Now, my boss didn't live in the house, but she had 24/7 access to me. When you are living with an abuser, you're always at a heightened state, that fight or flight modality. And when you're in that, it's really hard to heal. That's one of the reasons it took 10 years. Even though I was going through counseling and doing all these other things, my physical body and my emotions were still in that fight or flight mode, which made it difficult to move forward. I talk more about that in this next book, Transforming Mindsets, which came out on February 29th. What a great day. In 2024, it is now available on Kindle and paperback. So I'm going to walk you through the transformation process. And I see Merlin has come to visit. What is the process of transforming our mindsets? We learn from life lessons. They are our teacher as we choose. Notice the word choice. We choose to learn from our mistakes. If we don't want to learn from our mistakes, then we're going to be stuck. And that's pretty much where I was. We absolutely cannot, under any circumstance, play the victim. Woe is me. Well, this happened and this happened and this happened, so that's why I'm stuck. I did that, and didn't work out too well. Negativity cannot create a positive outcome. If we're constantly focusing on all the negative crap going on around us, then we're going to live out of that negativity. So attitudes create after their kind. So if we're always in a fight or flight stage, that's what we're going to function out of. And you saw that in those 10 years that I was at the sorority. Recognize that we are a 3-part being, spirit, soul, and body. Now, I knew this in my head, but I didn't understand it in my heart until I began this process. Learn to balance our entire self between the spirit, soul, and the body equally. At any given time, one can function higher than the others, but we have to bring balance to all 3 of them. We function from the highest position of love, which scientists are now saying is the strongest frequency. If you listen and watch near-death experiences, every one of them have talked about love in a way that they have never understood it before. And they come back from those completely changed. What is it about love that changes everything. We learn to replace negative triggers with the positive opposites. We associate the word trigger as a negative thing, but you can have positive triggers as well. Again, we're finding balance in what we're doing. This takes us to our 3 parts. What are they? Love and light set the precedent for operational procedures in cooperation with our divine creator. This is where the spiritual part comes in, of which we often ignore the importance of that part. Now, I'm using the word divine creator because I don't know where people are spiritually. There's a whole bunch of religions out there that really kind of say a lot of the same things, and they have different names. Some use God, some use creator, some use source, some use the one. And I interchange those words in the book, Transforming Mindsets, because the principles are the same. So we have a spirit, we have a soul, and we have a body. The spirit is at the top level, which has at least 8 gateways. You know, think about, you look, well, we'll get into that in a minute. That literally connects to love. So the spirit gateway sits right under and basically marries itself to love and light. Then right below that, in the middle level, is the soul, which has 7 gateways that connects with the spirit when we open the spirit up to the soul. But we can block the spirit by all the trauma in our lives and not function from the spirit. The body is like at the very bottom, it has 5 gateways and it connects to the soul. And so when the soul starts lining up, this body's going, wait a minute, something's going on up there. I need to pay attention. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I am going to use a lot of symbolism in here, and you're going to, if you read all the ancient texts, even all of the myths and all the mythology, that is all symbolism. They use the names of gods, they use the names of, they use stories, all kinds of things to get points across. We all understand symbolism, we just may not realize that's what it's called. So the rest of this, we're going to use symbolism. Many ancient texts use stories, parables, tales, and/or expressions as teaching tools. We better understand concepts when we have a variety of ways to view and internalize the information that's being taught. And I know that as a teacher. Good teachers use a variety of techniques to reach many learning styles. As a music teacher, I would present a concept 5 or 6 different ways, because you have visual learners, you have spatial learners, you have tactical learners, you have learners that learn much better when you just give them a piece of paper and they can read it. So those of you who are the tactical learners, you can tell just by looking at what's written down, that's going to speak to you quite well. Symbolism often uses pictures, visualization, and the imagination through stories, music, art, and other visuals. In the process of transforming mindsets, we can view our person, our spirit, soul, and our body as a life or personal mountain. So we're going to use the symbolism of a mountain to describe our life. We function like a mountain. We live, move, and have our being from the top of a life mountain where we govern everything that comes into as well as out of our spirit, soul, and body. Think about all the cities in ancient times. They would build huge walls around the city with all these different gates, and each of the gates had a different purpose. So we're basically taking that theme and applying it to our personal being. And a lot of cities had different levels. I mean, you look at the Great Wall of China. They built that wall for a reason. And even if you look at countries now, some countries have walls, some countries have border crossings and all these things specifically to protect and keep their country in a place where they can function the way they want to function. So we just basically are applying that principle to a mountain. So from the top of our mountain, we learn to govern what comes into the various gateways of the mountain. In Hebrew thinking, each of the gates to the city of Jerusalem had a specific purpose. They were used for specific things. They did business in them. One was the dung gate, where they put all the garbage out. So anyone who has a Judeo-Christian background might understand this concept. I don't know if they've used it in other religions, but I'm using it because it seems to make sense to most people that I speak with. From a position of rest, we can both cherish and protect what comes into and out of our gates. So our life mountain. And I love this picture, which I got on Pixabay, by the way. So shout out to Pixabay. That's Pixabay. It's a great place to get free pictures. And all of the pictures from here came from Pixabay. And then I used Pixlr X to edit and add other things. So I may put a link to those since I'm speaking about them in the content below. Notice on this mountain, you've got all these beautiful rays that are coming out of the mountain. And at the bottom, you see this house. That represents us, the body, the physical being of who we are. That's one of the reasons I liked it. And then you can see the reflection. And we'll get into the reflection piece later. So our gates look like this. But again, what's on the outside, what we see on the outside is a reflection of what's on the inside. We call it our aura, the energy center, or the energy that comes from within us that actually spreads out beyond us. It's how you walk into a grocery store and you get the heebie-jeebies by some dude standing in the line in front of you. That is what many call the aura, or the energy that we are emitting from what comes from within. What you see on the outside is not always necessarily what's on the inside, but it's generally a reflection of it. So we have our love is at the very top, and the spirit works with that. Then in the middle is the soul, and at the bottom is the body. And you see I put it next to the house. Love reigns supreme. Yes. Then the spirit gates are faith, hope, revelation, intuition, fear of God, prayer, reverence, and worship. All of these have to do with a spiritual side of us. All religions have some form of all of these. Your intuition is what comes into your gut feeling. The soul, conscience, reason, imagination, will, choice, emotions, and your mind. The body, see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And we'll get into more of these later. Then I love this picture. Think about the very top of a mountain. If you've ever been to the top of a mountain, you can see for miles away. You can see down lower the mountain. So imagine that you're at the very top of the mountain, and at the top of that mountain is a throne. And you sit on that throne from a place of rest and love and peace, and you govern, you facilitate, you work with your life from an all-seeing position as you are seated with the divine creator, because we are part of the divine creation, because we came out of that. I don't think anyone is going to argue with us on that. Well, there will be some that might, but hear me out. We are seated in this place of pure love. You can't have fear. You can't have anxiety. You can't have any of those things in pure love. And you'll notice this picture at the top of the mountain, that love shines. That is what the concept we're looking at here. Love flows down the mountain and it permeates all of the gates below it. Love can only travel from above. You know, gravity takes its force. Whatever attitude we put on begins at the top of the mountain and affects everything below it. Will we put on love or will we put on fear? It's our choice. During my marriage, I lived out of fear. So my spirit was completely shut down. My soul and my body all responded to the fear that I was living out of, which is what caused me to be sick. We'll get into that later. Let that fly away. My transformation process. Once I realized that I needed to bring balance to my three parts, I began to see a healing. This was in 2010. January of 2010 is when it began. I understood spiritually, emotionally, and physically that I needed healing. The spirit was more opening it up and getting revelation and understanding and listening to my intuition. I had to realize that my life experiences are part of the healing process. By choosing, there's the word choice again, to learn from my mistakes and my traumas. So even though this abusive marriage left me in shambles, what could I learn from it? What could I take away from it to make me a better person? I hadn't thought about that until 2010. I had to realize there must be balance between the spirit, soul, and the body. I'd let my spiritual self atrophy in abusive marriage. So really, my spirit was just taking a hike. It was just not really doing much anything during that time. The top functioning portion of my being was the soul, which you saw in the picture is the middle of the mountain. If you are standing at the middle of the mountain, how in the heck are you going to see what's on top? You're not. You're only going to see from the perspective of being in the middle of the mountain. When we live out of trauma, we are functioning from the soul. That's the highest level we can function from. I had to learn a new way of retraining my brain for a better possibility, and that can only be done through spiritual perspective. The transformation process involves stepping into our identity. If we're functioning out of the soul, we'll never realize our calling in life and what's in our identity. And I go into that in the Transforming Mindsets book. I'm not going to do that here. You can read about it there. Transformation requires practice. Yes. That takes patience and perseverance. I couldn't be a classical musician without spending all those hours in a practice room. I used to joke with my students that I spent more time in a practice room than they were alive. They'd always laugh, but it was the truth. Okay, there we go. Here's a picture looking at the top, because I know I'm giving as many visuals as possible. Notice that the love is right smack in the center of everything. And this would be like the core of your being. And you're going to see a picture later on where when we infuse that entire core of the being with love and light, it affects the entire mountain. So your spirit, your soul, and your body. And you see, I've just kind of written all the different gateways that are on there. Now, people have suggested that there are more gateways, and there probably are. That these are, the basic ones. Everything starts from a position of love. And this is pure love. Love is always in the light. Love and light work together. Everything about spirit is rooted in possibilities. This is quantum physics. It's the observer thing. Okay? So everything is rooted in possibilities from a position of love that can affect our worldly function. How do we function in the world is going to be determined by the possibilities we choose to engage with. When the soul is clouded over, it blocks the entrances to the spirit gates. You can't see above it because we've blocked it from below. A lot of people say that the spirit needs healed, but I would beg to differ with that, and you'll understand why here in a bit. The soul can become clouded when traumas and negative life experiences keep us in a state of confusion, frustration, anger, fear, blah, 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 along with all of their cuddle buddies. I call them cuddle buddies because they like to work together. Pesky little things. When the soul is clouded over, it affects the body because the body is paying attention to what's going on in the soul. As you saw from the sickness that I had when I was married, my whole body was coming into alignment with what was coming out of my soul. Emotional roots can create physical symptoms. It wasn't until I started dealing with the emotional roots of the illness that I got during the marriage that I found healing. And I did that by opening my spirit gates and starting to function from top down, the very top. So what happens when we don't function from the top of our mountain? I love this picture. I don't even know what mountain it is, but notice that spirit and love work together and they are always above the clouds. The soul, I mean, if you've ever been in an airplane and you've flown through clouds, you can't see nothing. I don't know how the pilots find their way I mean, they have all this navigation equipment, but they can't see anything. You've looked out the window and notice how the body is also clouded. This is a pictorial representation of what it looks like when we're functioning out of soul. The spirit and love are up there saying, hey, 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 we're up here. Pay attention. Get rid of the clouds. Come and join us. Let us flow down into you so that we can bring you into the light. So the best course of action for healing: understand that we can foster our spiritual self from a position of partnering with our divine creator. That opens the floodgates of the spirit to uncover the cloud over the soul. So think about that as we keep moving forward. When we choose, there's the word choice again, to unblock the spirit gates from the soul side, because it's not blocked from the spirit, it's blocked from the soul. This allows love and light to flow through the spirit and cleanse hurts, traumas, and negative life experiences that rest in the soul. The body becomes aware that the soul is receiving healing as love and light continue to flow from the spirit through the soul gates, and into the body gates. The soul is like, wait a minute, what's going on up there? Ooh, I feel some love. I haven't felt love like this ever. It's kind of like the near-death experience people. They go and it changes everything because they finally feel and understand what love really is. Then the soul is like, wait a minute. Then you go clean all the different soul gateways and the body's going, excuse me, I want some of that too. That's kind of how it works. The body begins to self-heal. We were designed to self-heal. The body begins to self-heal when we bring balance to the spirit, soul, and body so that they all function as they're designed to function. So what's in the center of our being is also affected by pure love and light. And I showed that earlier from the top version. You've got your throne where you're governing your life that's sitting at the top of the mountain with love over the top of it. And that inner self, when we're functioning from love, then it will affect the spirit, the soul, and the body. But instead of love over that throne, there's fear or anxiety or anger. It's going to affect everything else. And it'll start from the inner self and then work its way out. Imagine that your inner self is that place of communion with the divine creator in your inner temple. Some ancient texts say your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It is even the Hebrew culture, their temples represented the proportions of the body. And we see that in the Fibonacci series. I think they're called divine proportions. I think it's Fibonacci. Here you are the architect of your life as you partner with the one who created all things. This is the difference between New Age thinking, which everything is done as you as your own. Whereas when we partner with the one who created us and our divine creator, it's a partnership. I'm looking at this as a partnership. At the top of the mountain sits our throne, where we make decisions on how to govern thoughts, our intents, and our actions. We preside over our life from a position of rest and peace for best results. From the top of the mountain on our seat of rest, we allow pure love and light to flow down the mountain and into the spirit, the soul, and the body gateways. And just like everything else, we need to clean, like deep clean, especially when trauma is involved. Our spirit, soul, and body come into agreement. They come into agreement with our thoughts, our intents, and our actions. What's in our heart determines how we function. Here are your spirit gates. The spirit gates are faith, prayer, hope, reverence, worship, intuition, fear of God. Every religion has some form of this. Intuition is that gut feeling. Now, we can corrupt the spirit, not the spirit gates, but we can worship anything. We can reverence anything. We can have hope in anything. We can pray to anything. But when we're doing that, we're functioning out of the soul. Because the spirit, it has a direct connection to the divine creator. So functioning from the spirit. Every aspect of the spirit has to do with non-tangible things. They are possibilities, quantum possibilities that are often not explainable. Science likes to explain things. And if they have no answer for it, it means nothing. Our spirit gates are bathed in pure love and light. Our spiritual self leads the way for the soul and the body. The spirit sits at the top of the mountain with love. Here we have a perfect view of our entire life where we make the best decisions. The spirit directly connects with the divine creator. Our spirit helps us understand our identity so we can learn to live from our true self. All the gates in the spirit then flow down to the soul and the body. Now let's take a look at the soul gates. Conscience. This is subconscious, unconscious. This is the whole thing to do with your conscience. We have our choice when we make our choices. Imagination, reasoning, will, mind, and emotions. These are all of the things. This is how we function. And you can actually take the things that were in the spirit gate, like worship, and bring it down into this level and put it into emotions or your will or your choice and use it for something that it wasn't intended. So that's why I'm saying, I think that's why some people say the spirit gates might be corrupt, but what you're doing is you're pulling those things and putting them in the soul level rather than leaving them in the spirit level where they are pure. That's my guess. More research is needed on that. So functioning from the soul. We function with a balanced soul. Now notice I say balanced soul when pure love flows into the soul from the spirit. The spirit is the guide for the soul. The soul really wants to be healed and walk in wholeness. Your soul really doesn't want to have fear and anger and frustration. We let that in because of circumstances. When blocking the spirit gates, we're only functioning from 2/3 of our being. We're leaving out a whole third part of it. We're leaving out the spirit. We can't see what's happening at the top of the mountain. So when something comes at us, we don't have the strategy to know how to combat it because we're only functioning in the bottom 2/3 of the mountain. When we function through fear, anxiety, anger, depression, or any of their cuddle buddies, our actions come from the position of our soul. Now, I've said this before, but I'm reiterating that point. And again, I'm not telling you anything I haven't done myself. I had to figure this out. I did hear some teachings that talked about the different gateways. And I'm like, at first it was, huh? I started engaging with it myself, and then I figured it out. When trauma and negative life experiences rule our mindsets, we put a lock on the spirit gates. We're functioning from the soul. I put a lock on the spirit gates during my marriage because I was functioning out of the trauma of being verbally, emotionally, and spiritually abused. Everything from that point on was negative. I basically went into a completely numb state, was so ill I could hardly function. Something like chronic fatigue. I have no idea. I was functioning from my soul, was so locked up, I didn't know how to move forward. The age of reason, you remember that? Essentially changed thinking by throwing the spiritual experiences out the window because there was no way to explain them. So if we can't explain something, it doesn't exist. What kind of common sense does that not make? Just because we don't have an answer doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we don't have the answer yet. Was until the 1800s, spirituality was considered a major part of our daily life. Science and spirituality were intermixed until about the 1800s. somewhere in the middle of the 1800s when the Industrial Revolution and the Age of Reason and that whole thing all started occurring. You go back and you look at all the ancients, the ancient Sumerian tablets, you go and look at the Egyptians, you look at the way everything functioned from spirituality as much as it did from everything else. We poo-poo that now, but there has to be something to it. Because if you look at our society right now, there's a lot of interestingness that's going on because I believe we've blocked the spirit. Our body gates: see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. This is all about the physicalness around us. Science focuses on the physical. They focus on what they can see, what they can put their hands on, what's tangible. So as far as I'm concerned, a lot of science, until we got to quantum physics, is only functioning on the bottom third of the mountain. Let that soak in. We'll leave it there. Our body gates. The body gates are living out of our physical needs in the world around us. Our body will only function properly when the soul is in its right place. You got to get rid of the negativity so the body can say, oh, I can rest. When we function from the soul as our go-to method, our body can only pay attention to what's coming out of the soul. The soul dictates how the body responds. We do it in order: spirit, soul, that stuff in the middle, and the body. So the body, if we're not functioning out of the spirit, then the body can only take from the soul. Dis-ease, which we translate into disease, is often determined by our emotions and our choices. And I said earlier, emotional roots cause physical symptoms. Our cells and our water in our body, because we're at least 70% water of our system, they carry the memory. And science is now calling this epigenetics. It carries the memory of our ancestral line, what we thought about ourselves, what we say, how we interact with our surroundings, and how we behave. In the book, I talk about how we can override, over RIDE, all of the nasty epigenetics and all the bad stuff. And then we overwrite WRITE with the new version of what we desire. Our thoughts, intents, and actions are played out in our body. So we can override and then overwrite all of the negativity through our thoughts, intents, and actions. And when we do that from our spirit, then bring that down into the soul, the body goes, yes, finally, healing can happen. What's inside of us is reflected beyond us. And you see, I just put some lines in here. And this is the first place I show the reflection. You can see that people beyond us see what's in us from the outside. They may not understand. I mean, so even the physical appearance sometimes is obvious and other times it's not. Some people can smell it. I mean, there are sometimes I'm around people, there's no reason they should have a certain smell. And I'm like, what is that smell? And it's not like anything I've ever smelled before. So if you're using your hear, your smell, your taste, and your touch, then you're going to respond to people in different ways depending on what your spiritual senses are. And I love this picture too, because this is a beautiful picture of a representation of a very clear reflection of our inner self when we're living in that place of peace and harmony. I think it's Mount Baker. Can't remember. Moving forward. When we focus on fostering our spiritual health, the soul finally has a mentor. Our thoughts, intents, and actions dictate, both positive and negative, if our gateways function in harmony or dissonance. Changing mindsets requires practice that takes patience and perseverance. There is no easy button. Mindset shifts, they say, can take 6 to 9 months minimum of practicing every day, hammering at it in love. Our choices, emotions, and attitudes settle in our body as memories. That's where I go back to, you can override and then overwrite with the desired outcome. Life and death are truly in the power of the tongue. As our being becomes more balanced, where we're functioning equally, 1/3 spirit, 1/3 soul, 1/3 body, that's when we discover our true identity. We begin functioning out of our inherent character traits, which I talk about that at the end of the book as well. As our being becomes more balanced, we become healthier, spirit, soul, and body. And then that takes us into the last slide. I believe it might be the last slide. Transforming mindsets. I am going to be beginning a class sometime in 2024 to help people learn to bring balance into the entire spirit, soul, and body. And the way you do this is check the Healing Frequencies Music website for details on the course release. If you subscribe to the Healing Frequencies Music newsletter, you will get all the information, because that's the only place I advertise is in the newsletter. If you want anything from me, all the deals, all the specials, get it from the newsletter. That helps, because I'm not using Facebook Marketplace or all these other places to advertise. It makes it easier to keep the prices reasonable. So if you want information, subscribe to the newsletter. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you for being part of this presentation today. There are 3 other videos that are on the YouTube channel that you should also watch. The one about cancel culture, the one, there's 3 that I did in a row. Cancel culture is one of them, and I will put links to all 3 of those below this video, because they will help explain some of my thought processes of what I'm discussing here. We are in a society now that if you don't believe like me, you're wrong. To me, that is a huge red flag. Balance is being able to look at the opposing side and making a determination of what is right, what is fair, what is balanced from what that side is saying. And I will look at things that I completely disagree with, because there's always truth hidden somewhere into that. And it's the same way when we're looking at what's going on within our being. And I can safely say, and you, those of you who followed me for long enough, I am healthier now than I've been in 30 plus years. And I am seeing myself, spirit, soul, and body, restored. And as we become greater functioning in the spirit, soul, and the body, we regain some youthfulness in the process of doing that. So I encourage you, get the book, Transforming Mindsets. If you've been in abusive situations, get But Words Will Never Hurt Me. Get the workbook, work through it, and then maybe I'll get to see you in the class that's coming up soon. So again, thank you for joining me, and we look forward to seeing you in more videos. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe this video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because algorithms, I think, like that sort of thing. Anyway, thanks again for joining me today.